Can you do, can you do me a favor? Can you look in the camera and say like, comment, and subscribe?
Like, comment.
Like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. So to my grandson's channel. Say like, comment, and subscribe to my grandson's channel.
Like, comment, and subscribe to my grandson's channel.
You heard it. Okay, so today I have my good friend Mike Rowe. He is the group treasurer at Haleon. We worked together back when I was at GSK. You were leading the captive and I was supporting it from the HR side. You've been a friend to me outside of work. You've been an awesome colleague and you've been a mentor of mine. So I've always appreciated that. And I'm happy that we can have this conversation today. So thank you for doing this. And can I turn it over to you to talk a little bit about your role today and what you currently do at Haleon?
Sure. Thanks, Anthony. And it's a real pleasure to do this with you and, to share some learnings along the way. Yeah, so today I am the group treasurer for Haleon, as you said, basically responsible for the overall funding for Haleon, which in simple terms means making sure that we have money in the right place at the right time to fund the business. And then we're also responsible for sort of mitigating sort of the currency impacts for the group. So looking at sort of hedging and mitigation of that currency risk. And then we're also responsible for managing our interest costs because we invest money and we borrow money to fund the organization. So we need to take steps to manage that cost as efficiently as possible.
All right, thank you. So can you tell me, how did you get into doing this work?
Well, that's a good question, actually, and that's fine. So I'm not a career treasurer. In fact, when we first met, I was running the insurance team. And so I think the best way to sort of describe how I am where I am today is probably give you a bit of a view of my journey through life. I started life out as an actuary and I qualified as an actuary. I joined a consulting firm and I did sort of international benefit consulting up until I was about probably late 30s, early 40s. And I decided that, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the work, but I wanted to do something different. And so at that stage, I had an opportunity to actually go and work in HR. And I worked in executive REM on the executive reward side, where there I was responsible for essentially the sort of performance and incentivization of the sort of senior community within BHP at the time. And I really enjoyed that bit of it because, that sort of gave me a view of how to structure incentives to sort of drive organizational behaviors. And sort of, there was a little bit of art in that, and then there's a bit of science from the HR side. And I did that for a few years. And actually in that role, I got to meet the group treasurer of BHP. And I'd just finished a big project at the time. And I was looking to do either stay in HR or look to do something else. And the group treasurer said to me, why don't you apply for a role in Treasury? And at that stage, I knew nothing about Treasury. So I interviewed for it. Fortunately, was given the job. And that was about 10, 15 years ago. And I've stayed in Treasury more or less ever since then, with a brief sojourn into insurance, where I oversaw this sort of an insurance function, but within a treasury organization at the time.
And so when you made that switch, did you know then that you wanted to stay in this? Did you like this side better?
No, I didn't actually.
Okay.
I think so for me personally, I'm driven by learning new things. I like the idea of coming to work every day and sort of coming out at the end of the day feeling I've learned something, whether that's a technical thing or a personal thing or, a work thing. And so when I went into Treasury, it was just with that mindset. And I think over time, what I learned was when I was doing the actuarial advisory work, that was quite technical, scientific in a way. The HR piece was probably more art than science, with a little bit of science. Whereas Treasury, I think, has a nice mix. There's the science, there's a technical side to Treasury clearly, but there's also an art to it. And I think to be good in the job, I think you need to understand both the art and the science of treasury. And so, yeah, so in fact, I think I'm quite surprised, so it's given me that mix. And so I've enjoyed it, and sort of, I still feel, every day I come to work, I'm learning something every day still. So as long as that continues, I'll carry on in the role.
Yeah, I like that. I agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So since I feel like the more that I have these conversations, the more I learn that it's very rare that anyone has a linear career anymore. I know for yours, you could kind of tie in, like it made sense a little bit to move from the international benefit side, especially given the captive work. There's a very close relationship, which is how we got to work together so much.
Mm.
And your understanding of the benefit side made it a lot easier for us to partner. Like I say for, I know I don't want to get too specific on this because it's more general, but for the captive piece, if the benefits team or the HR side and the treasury side or the risk management side don't have a good relationship or don't see things the same way as far as strategy goes, I don't think you could get as much value out of the captive. So I kind of see the jump or the move from there, from HR to there, and I totally resonates what you're saying. But for me, for instance, I at least understood that portion of the work that you did previously. But now that you're moving into, or now that you're in the group treasurer role, what would be something that might surprise people about your role, or something behind the scenes that a lot of people wouldn't think about as far as group treasury?
Well, I think I suppose there are a couple of things. I think the first thing I would say is that, you know, some people might see treasury just as a technical function and just people that move money, bank money, and sort of just a sort of a transactional technical role. I think that it sort of comes back to what I was saying before is, that is a part of it. But what I think people will be surprised about is that actually, if you run treasury, like we did on the benefit side, you actually need to spend time thinking about what is your strategy for treasury and how does that strategy actually support the objectives of the corporate. And essentially, you need to again look at what what your business is trying to achieve. And then from there, it's then about setting, well, how, if that's the strategy, how do we set up the financing to support that? How do we set up the cash management structures to support that? If you do that in isolation, it fails. And so, and that's where, that's the art, I suppose. In some ways, if I think about my career, learning that art, the ability to sort of translate a corporate strategy to your job and sort of put your job into that context is something, that you should do, but it's regardless of your job. But, when you look at technical roles, you may think, well, you don't need to do that, but you absolutely do. And I think the other thing that people may be a bit surprised about is that, get involved in all sorts of things in terms of treasury is a function that's almost like a backbone of an organization. So you get involved in things from just payment processes, which arguably would sit in in the payments function area that does some dependencies with procurement, but you need to understand that to get your operations right. Through to understanding how tax needs to work and what they're trying to achieve, through to, COSEC team, who are your link with your board and the sort of the various directors of all the entities that you need to work with, through to M&A. If you've got a business development team, they're looking at things, you need to support, that transaction. So it really is at the backbone, at the center of, the full ambit of what a corporate needs to do to sort of grow and grow successfully.
Yeah, I love that. I think that you've talked about that a lot. Even just, I mean, I know that you're saying that it's transferable, but I think that you kind of instilled that in me too. That you could be an individual contributor or an expert in your space, but in order to be successful in that space, it's best to understand the broader strategy surrounding you, because you're ultimately supporting a lot of the goals, either from leadership or from the broader company. And I know your Treasury specifically is meeting the goals of the company, but then if you bring that down a couple of levels, it's wherever you are in the company, I think that you can apply that too.
No, absolutely. And I think the key, or the critical question, is how do you define success? And success is not just financial. It's about, if you're trying to drive change in an organization, it's always easier to do so if you can put what you're doing into context. And then, also you may have an idea around how you need to roll something out in the business, and then someone may resist or not be able to do the change, rather than having an argument about why not. Why won't you? Your actual discussion, if you start with, well, are we both agreed on the outcome? Tick. Then the discussion becomes more constructive, and then you say, okay, well, if this method isn't working for you, what needs to change in order for us to sort of deliver on this particular objective? And it becomes a far more constructive argument and less personal, and things move along.
Yeah.
So, that's for me has been a really useful tool in the different roles that I've done.
That's great. Are there any milestones or achievements that you're particularly proud of throughout your career?
Yeah, look, I think I'll start with a funny one.
Okay.
I maybe says more about me than my personality type, but I was really pleased with the fact that, I finished university, I think, when I was about 20, roughly 2021. And I happened to go back to the university I was at in Johannesburg about 2 years later, because I'd enrolled to do an honors degree. And I walked past the library, and the security guard still recognized me and said hello and asked me how I was. So I was super proud of that because, it reflected I probably did spend a fair bit of time in the library, but it reminded me, I always used to talk to him, and we used to have a chat going in or when I was leaving in the evening, and it sort of reminded me, it's not hard to be nice and kind to somebody. They remember it, and I was really touched that he remembered me. So that's one on a personal level. I think career-wise, if I go through it, when I started working in Johannesburg, and I had a choice, I think, in the mid 90s to sort of stay there, or and I was enjoying, I love South Africa, and it's my home, and it always will be. But I had a choice to either continue there or address something that was really burning in me, which was I was about 26 or 27 at the time, and I didn't feel that I had been taught enough, that I'd sort of learnt enough about my skill. And, I took a decision then to sort of leave essentially a very sort of comfortable, and what could have been a very comfortable career, to kind of sort of reset in the UK, and essentially started here from ground zero. And I'm really proud of myself for taking that decision. It was, it was sort of, the easier decision would have been, well, you've got a good life, you can carry on, you'll be fine, and you'll be more than fine. But to sort of come here and then sort of work through starting again, learning the things that you thought you knew but realized actually didn't really understand them, and sort of going through that learning process. I did that learning process took about probably 3 or 4 years. And I'm chuffed that I did that. And so, probably another sort of personal one. And then I think career-wise, just, I think that my sort of things I'm proud of are, when I was on the international benefits side, I was probably one of the first, at the time, Boots had done a whole lot of work around cash flow matching of assets and liabilities, and it was a big thing in the UK. And I sort of took that concept into BHP, and completely reset how they thought about their financing and funding of their plans. And In fact, I think we were probably one of the first people at the time to put in place a cash flow matching strategy in the US. I remember having conversations with some big investment houses where the concept was still it was not necessarily a US thing,
Sure.
and so we did something together, and so sort of being sort of being at the front line of that was super interesting, and something that I was really impressed with. When I moved into the HR side and on the executive REM, there I learned, you know, I went into from sort of having knowledge of something, but moving into an area that I knew absolutely nothing about. The I think I started that role in March time, and pay review were June, and so I had to run this whole global pay review for the first time without knowing anything about it. And inevitably that first annual review, it didn't go very smoothly, and it was just it was chaos basically. And but again, I stuck at it, and by the time I finished that job, we had processes were smooth. We had new tools to help with some of the work, and we took the learnings and we grew. So that was great. And then on the treasury side, I've had the opportunity to get involved in some very, very big transactions, which have been very complex. And so, being able to deliver on those transactions was a huge sense of accomplishment, and sort of, again, starting with very little knowledge to then having the trust of my boss at the time to lead on these things and deliver on them. I felt really proud. And then I think more recently, I think with the switching from GSK to Haleon, I think, there were a couple of things there. We pre-separation, we sort of did a whole transformation of Treasury, and that was hugely complex, very, very challenging, lots and lots of competing interests, and there were lots of personalities involved, and the sort of, let's call it, white noise. I took the learnings of I used to work for this guy, and one of the things he told me, and which I understood, but I kind of, never kind of, it's never fully sunk in. But he said to me one day, he said, Mike, you know, you must never shoot the messenger. Listen to the message and react to the message. Don't react to the messenger. And I remember thinking, you say, yep, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. And on this transformation piece, there were lots of messengers, and and rather than reacting to it, saying, "Oh, you don't realize how we're working so hard. You're being too, you're not being realistic and whatever." I just kept that message in mind, and I used that with the team. It's like, okay, guys, let's not react. Let's hear what the message is, and then rather than shoot the messenger, if they want to shoot us, that's fine. That's no problem. But we're not returning the favor. And and then we keep, and then sort of being able to keep things factual, and and there were times where there were things weren't going very well, but because we understood the facts and we could measure what wasn't going well, that built confidence, and then sort of it got us over the line. And so we delivered a significant transformation in COVID, and with lots of people, lots of support along the way. But that was super, that was a real learning. It's kind of brought together a number of influences and things I had over time. And then, within Haleon, I think probably, if I reflect now, I think that probably the thing I'm really proud about is and I've shared this with my team, is, if I reflected on who we all were as individuals at the point of separation, and then I was thinking about who we are today, and when I look at the growth, in the personal growth, in the whole team, and how, people have actually, grown into their roles and grown confidence and wanting to, and have learned and done different things, and sort of that culture of learning, and, with performance, and, and all those good things. But that sort of, that culture of learning is super, super important to me. But actually seeing the impact that that's had on my team is probably, of all those things, is probably the one thing that I am probably proudest of. And you know, I'm I still intend to work for lots more years to come, but it's nice to be able to be in a position to, grow yourself and develop other people all at the same time, and sort of, put it into the melting pot and create optionality for people and then see them take it, and encourage them. I've absolutely loved it, and I'm super proud of that.
I love that. That's awesome. Yeah, during our time working together, I remember right before I left GSK is when most of this started, this work. So I saw what went into a little bit anyway, and I know how much time it took
Yeah,
from you and some of the broader teams too.
yeah,
And one thing that I think that I was always grateful for was you did always take the time. Like I remember when you said you're investing in other people's growth, when the roles shifted around on the HR side, I kept the captive, but the broader structure changed so much that I didn't have as much flexibility as I had previously. And you made sure that I still had the opportunity to come to GSK House. I think it was at the time, I think it was once a quarter, so that we can
yeah, that's right.
continue to focus on the captive strategy.
Yeah,
And that to me was, and I always enjoyed, one thing that I always enjoyed about you is that you were always honest. So if I came to you with a concern or if I wasn't in a good place with where things were going, you would be 100% honest with me and you're always willing to give advice. And so that kind of leads into the namesake of this podcast is If I Knew Then. And so you always helped me. You were always willing to share
yeah,
your hindsight. Like I remember us going for a beer after work at the pub near GSK House. I forget the name of it, but
King's Arms.
yes, yes, yes. And you were always
Yeah.
willing to share hindsight, and I always appreciated it.
Mm.
So that's kind of the idea here is that I'm always looking, I always love learning from people what they learned. I'm always willing to share on my side too. But I'm having those conversations and maybe they'd be helpful for others. And that's kind of why I'm
Yeah.
doing
No.
this. So
Yeah.
I guess the question then is there a piece of advice, and it could be multiple pieces, it could just be one piece. Is there a piece of advice that you wish you had earlier in your career and that maybe you would
Yeah.
tell your younger self or someone looking to follow in your footsteps potentially?
Yeah. I think I've been thinking a little bit about it. I think on a personal from a personal perspective, I think the one thing I would say is embrace your difference. When you start your career, and sort of going into broader life, you have this view of what's normal, and if your way of thinking is different, or if the way you dress is different, or whatever it is, or you speak in a different language or whatever, which happened with me is I was, I didn't embrace my difference enough when I was younger. I was trying to conform with what the norm was, depending on where I was working, what I was doing. And so it's only, as I got older, I realized that actually my difference in how I think and how I express things actually is valuable. A herd mentality is not helpful at all, in any context. And so, embrace your difference and have the confidence for it. And if people look different or speak differently to you, it doesn't matter. You're there for a reason. Trust that. Someone put you in there for a reason. Trust that, and don't doubt yourself, and embrace your differences. And I think so. So that certainly would be one. I think building probably on a similar theme is the don't be scared to stop learning. And so, you know, just because just because someone's asked you to do something, don't feel that you need to know how to do it and that you need to have all the answers. And trust that you've been asked to look at something because you can go and find the answers. You don't have to have all the answers right at that point in time. And I think there's more value in being clear on what you don't know versus what you do know. And so, if you're clear on what you don't know, then you can go and ask the right questions. You can get the right people, around around your around you, and you can you can build a team or a support network or whatever far more effectively if you make it all about you and about about what what you do know, and not maybe you feel a bit too scared or ashamed to talk about what you don't know. It's so much harder, and I think I've learned over time that actually people appreciate you saying, well, actually I don't know the answer to that,
Mhm.
but I'll tell you what, good question, let me go and find out. Or I'm trying to go here from A to B. I can see my way through to you know, to this sort of step, but I'm not sure how to go from here to here. What do you think? And sort of, that conversation either can help you, well, certainly helps you solve, but I tell you the other thing is sometimes can change your whole way of thinking. You may have a view, you take a view on something, and then by being clear on what you don't know and you start talking to somebody, you could actually go and learn, actually, there's a whole different approach, or in fact, actually, it was not a problem in the first place because you didn't actually really understand it. So that certainly would be another thing I would have wanted to have started practicing sort of earlier in my career. And then, I think I think the final bit I would say is, and it's a bit linked to the first one, but it's nuanced in a way, is that I think it's all right to be nice, and uh, when you don't have to be hard nosed or aggressive or whatever it is to prove to somebody that you're good or successful. I think being nice is a great quality, and I think quite often I've been told, "Oh, you're too nice. You won't progress." And it sort of that comes back to what I was saying earlier is, but that is my nature. I'm not sort of looking uh, um, to sort of railroad something. I think the hindsight bit is be nice, be kind, okay, but also be clear on what your boundaries are, and so that people also know at what point things have gone beyond
Mhm.
acceptable, and so, sort of, and that sort of also helps you stay authentic to yourself, and it sort of keeps, uh, it means that you don't over start compromising yourself and land up in a situation that you're then not comfortable with. So I think, you know, maybe in my case, I try to be nice and sort of serve and look after the people that I work with and for. And I think the being able to put some boundaries around that sooner in my career rather than later, I think would be one of essentially the learning I would take it looking back. Yeah, I think those are the three main things that I can sort of think of at the moment.
Yeah, I really like that.
Hopefully helpful.
Yeah. And I completely agree with everything you said. There's at Microsoft, they talk about having a culture of a growth mindset, and instead of being know-it-alls, being learn-it-alls.
Yeah.
And if you change it's true. If you go into a situation with just saying like, here are the things I know versus what are the things I don't know, or just being open to the situation,
Mm,
it completely changes the vibe. It changes the potential outcome.
mm.
I completely agree with that. And then the other thing, go ahead.
Curiosity is a wonderful thing, being able to, to want to, to be curious about something in or outside of your area, you know, and having that as in your sort of DNA or in your toolkit, it's brilliant,
Yeah.
because, even if it's, it's not really directly related to what you're doing, it actually helps you in how you think, how you problem solve going forward. And it gets you more comfortable with being able to go and talk and learn and find things out to ultimately solve problems. I think it's a fabulous thing. And it's a nice culture, nice approach that you described there within Microsoft. That's fabulous.
Yeah, I really like that. And then we also had one of our leaders say, it's funny, I don't I don't mean this negatively, but when you say that you're too kind, then maybe that comes across as like there's certain things that you won't do because you don't want to put someone in an uncomfortable situation. But I've always known you as a direct person. I've never known you
Yeah.
as a mean person, but like I never crossed my mind that you were too kind. But
I
one of the
think I've
things
learned that. I learned how to do that over time.
okay, I see.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
that was something that I always appreciated because it was
Yeah.
something that I struggled with as well. For me, it's always easier to have everything out in the open than it is to
Yeah.
hold things in, and finding a way to be constructive and to say
Yeah.
things in the moment without it coming across as mean or rude. I always thought you did
Yeah.
that well. I got to listen to our CFO at one of our conferences for Microsoft, and I forget exactly the phrasing, but it was something along the lines of she views being direct as being kind.
It's
Because
exactly what I was going to say.
yeah, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I think what I was trying to say is being nice is about actually, and kind is about actually being able to say to somebody, hey, you know, you've done something in this way, or you're thinking about it in this way, or communicating. I don't think that's the right thing to do, rather than
Sure.
placating. And I think and that's what I was trying to say is I learned that later through the
Okay.
career, and that's where the boundary comes in, because your
Gotcha.
boundary tells you, if you don't have the boundary, then you're kind of placating to be
Hmm.
nice, and then that's taking it out of your value system, and then gets you into difficult situations at times. And so being able to have those boundaries, and then it becomes easier to have a conversation, and you can say it in a way that's not personal, not angry, cruel or anything. I've enjoyed having conversations like that. I love getting feedback, and I think, and people, that I talk with appreciate it as well. And so, as they say, every day is a school day.
Yep. And I
It
agree
should
too.
be
I think
anyway.
that when you get feedback from someone, when you know that they're being honest, it changes
Yeah,
how you
absolutely.
receive it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it does. And, sometimes, yeah, you can, hear things from folk that, you may not get on with personally and so on, and it's sort of then quite easy your natural reaction is to react defensively. And that comes back to what I was trying to say earlier. I think there's huge value in listening to what was said rather than who
Who
said
said it?
it, and then sort of getting a little bit of distance between how you emotionally feel about something versus what you're actually hearing. And because sometimes there's an element of truth in what they're saying, and I think you need to be, honest with yourself, and take it on board, and
Yeah. I think
and
that's
go
great
from there.
advice. All right. Thank you for that. So what's next for you? What are your future goals? I know you said that you want to continue to work for some time. So what do you have in mind?
Look, I don't have let's say, I've never had a career goal, by the way.
Okay.
So if you asked me 20 years ago, if you told me 20 years ago or 30 years ago I'd be the group treasurer of a FTSE 30 company, I would have said no way. In fact, I didn't even know what a group treasurer was then. But so you know, so I don't have a career like that sort of title aspiration, if you like. But I think for me, it's about continuing to, like be able to learn, innovate in whatever I'm doing. So, in the current role, there's lots that we have done and are doing in that space. And when I look at today, with and I wouldn't pretend to understand the technology in any detail, but when you look at AI and the sort of where technology is today, it absolutely excites me. I almost feel like I'm starting a career again. So, sort of having a role where you sort of have combining, the benefit of your experience, but then taking the benefit that comes from that technology, and then being able to sort of, transform your area, grow the people that are working with you. That is something, I would absolutely love to do. And, hopefully that can be within this role or within Halion. But if as a next step, I would love to do something like that. I think it would be fascinating. As the next move, sort of being able to combine, the experience, my work experience with this technology and being able to sort of transform a function, but also, you know, transform how people work and how they learn, and putting the two together, I think it would be fascinating, because I think the two go in hand. I don't think, the new technologies necessarily replace people. I think it can enhance
I agree.
what you do, and I think it can actually, yeah, it can, it can be, it can make life absolutely brilliant. When I think about when I started out, I spent as an actuarial student, I had to fill out pieces of paper and write down all the names of the people in their pension fund, their dates of birth, then manually calculate their ages. Then obviously we started doing that on spreadsheets, but being able to have that all done automatically, but then being able to then use whatever it is that those calculations to then think more tactically or more strategically. In this
Yeah.
example, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you want to do it? And and that applies to lots of other areas. So that would be something next for me. What role that looks like, I have no idea.
Yeah. That's awesome. I completely agree with you, by the way. I think right now for me, it's an exciting time to be at Microsoft. I've talked about this before,
Yeah.
but even the way that the marketing behind our AI, just calling it Copilot, is exactly what you said. It
Mm.
doesn't replace, it supports, it's with you. You're the main
Yeah.
pilot, you have a
Yeah.
Copilot there to support. And I
Yeah.
agree that it ends up removing some of the drudgery of your day-to-day work, or some of the administrative things that you don't want to focus on as much, but take up a lot of your time, and it will free you up to be more strategic, as you said. I completely agree.
But to making that mindset change, I mean, I'm busy learning that myself, and I keep
Yeah.
saying to myself, you just need to see Copilot as this friend who absolutely knows everything. So your job is to ask your friend the right question
Yep.
and then be able to go back to your friend and say, did you mean that or this? You still need to distill it and think
Yep.
for yourself, but I think it's fabulous having that access and that creativity, at your fingertips or voice. I think it's incredible.
All right. Well, thank you very much for doing this, Mike.
Pleasure.
I really appreciate it. This was an awesome conversation. Anything else you want to say, or?
No, thank you. I've really enjoyed it. Yeah, no, we'll keep in touch, no doubt.
All right. Thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Anthony.
Cheers.
Bye.